In a single day, a school shooting in Colorado, followed by an attack on a campus in Utah. And that resulted in the assassination of an activist known as Charlie Kirk. And his assassination was certainly the latest in a troubling trend of political violence in this nation. You think about the April firebombing of fellow Governor Josh Shapiro's home, barely escaped with the safety of his children. A June shooting of a Minnesota lawmaker, Melissa Hortman, and her husband. And it continues. We never forget the assassination attempt on President Trump when he was campaigning last year. Earlier attacks at the home of Nancy Pelosi on her husband. Attempt to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And of course, the attacks on our Capitol on January 6th. And we've even seen domestic terrorism in our own state of New York. And it was just over 3 years ago, when 10 innocent individuals were gunned down doing nothing more than shopping in a neighborhood grocery store. It was a racially motivated killing spree. And in the aftermath of that, but also as a precursor to what it is now unfolding, we took immediate action, as we do here in New York. I had an executive order to increase funding for threat monitoring and targeted violence prevention. And in my first budget, I made sure that we could provide more money to localities, $10 million to invest in domestic terrorism grants. We actually knew we needed to beef up our online surveillance. I think there have been just a small handful of people doing this job statewide. And we added 20 employees full-time and almost $16 million to the budget there, and added more people to the operations and focusing on investing in our state police. So we're doing what we can, looking at cybersecurity. Colonel Crow and others give me a regular briefing on the threats in our state and whether they're homegrown or abroad. But it's really gotten to a point where we've really seen enough. How much more can this country endure? And I will call out dehumanizing language that leads to violence anytime. And that does not censor me from telling the truth, but there is a way that incidences or disagreements or policies can be described. Now, earlier today, and I want to thank all the elected officials who joined us here. We heard from every elected official here, but also 6 more leaders who are on Zoom. We can identify those, the leaders from the Senate and the Assembly, majority, minority. I wanted to have a small, more intimate dialogue, but also really create an environment where people can just speak out and just talk what's on their mind. And it was very important for me to hear. It was very candid. And we talked about the role that we play as leaders, our personal responsibility, and our own social media posts. And should elected officials be on social media? When you think about the debates and the fights that continue in that platform, and really, again, just beyond just what elected officials do, just the rise in the hate speech and dehumanization that occurs when things are said that we discuss you'd never say to someone walking down the street or in your workplace or in your place of worship. So there's something that Commissioner Bray talked about how inflammatory rhetoric leads to real violence. And she'll talk about some of the statistics that she monitors regularly. And it's not just a theory. There's something called stochastic terrorism. And what that is that direct linkage between the speech and the action. And what is happening, the dehumanization of people and ideas is leading to these violent consequences. So every leader has to be conscious of their language, all of us. And also, I have a friend, someone I got to know when he led our National Governors Association, Governor Cox of Utah, who it was his home state where the most recent political assassination occurred, Charlie Kirk. And he launched an initiative urging people to disagree better a number of years ago. I, as a governor in 23 others signed on to this initiative, and he launched it in cities and elsewhere. We had conversations about it. We did some videos. And it was born out of a desire to debate real ideas, but not dehumanize our political opponents or people we disagree with. So I want to thank him for that, but also encourage others to take some of the lessons. And we've handed out some literature on the websites and just some basic lessons in humanity. And it's a shame that we have to even talk about that, what you would have learned likely from your parents or in schools or in your houses of worship when you were younger. But how do we lose that? Where does it go? How is that, all that teaching about our shared values as Americans dissipate over a disagreement on a policy or the way someone phrases the debate? That's what we need to figure out. What is happening from that young, innocent age? And is it the radicalization and exposure to social media? We saw that that was the genesis of the top shooter in Buffalo. Direct correlation between him imitating and parroting language that had occurred at the Christ the King Massacre Church in New Zealand. So we can do more as elected officials. We need to listen a lot more, respect differences of opinion. And I think it would be surprising to many others who think that there is this divide that's forever there based on your party affiliation. I once represented the most Republican district in the state of New York as a Democrat. I recall going to Congress in my early days, and they had Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other. And I had the audacity to sometimes go across the aisle. There literally is an aisle. And you'd swear that there was some sort of moat or alligators there because nobody else was doing that. There was some fear of crossing over and being seen on the other side. I never had a problem with it because I'd talked to members of the other party, Republicans, about shared interests representing upstate, what we can do for our farmers, what we can do for our communities. And I think we just have to do more about just getting more to that gut level and getting back to the values we learned as we were younger and what defines us, and I've always believed set us apart as Americans, because it doesn't feel like it's there right now. And it's a shame that our children have to grow up in this environment, but it's not too late to change. I grew up in a time of political assassination. John Kennedy, I was very young, John Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, the shooting of George Wallace, a candidate for office. Jerry Ford was shot, Ronald Reagan was shot. So it's not new to this generation, but social media has taken it where it has created a more dangerous situation, not just for those national leaders, but also for a political activist or a Minnesota House member. So it's gotten down to a level that's causing a great deal of anxiety among elected officials of all stripes, their families, and all communities. But I do believe that there's a chance for a reset. That's what I want to talk about, is a reset. And despite views of the past, statements of the past, this could be a defining moment for our nation. And that's why I'm so proud to stand with like-minded elected officials from Long Island all the way to Buffalo who had this conversation and feel committed to doing what we can to disagree better and model the behavior that we want to see in all of our residents. And so I will turn it over to Commissioner Bray to give just some highlights of what we talked about and some data, and then ask two of our in-person representatives to give a couple of their reflections, and we'll take some questions then. Commissioner Bray.
Governor, thank you so much. I'm going to give a very high-level overview of some of the data we presented today, and we are distributing the full deck that we presented, the full brief that we presented today for use in reporting. This is a bar chart of terrorist plots and attacks against government targets. What you see in red is where extremist partisan ideology was motivating that attack, and you can see that Prior to 2015, it was incredibly rare in the last several decades, and then we've seen a precipitous increase of attacks that are extremist partisan motivated. One of the things we discussed is how much violence has been an acceptable answer for political grievance. A recent survey, 26% of Americans see violence as usually or always justified to advance a political objective. That's consistent across several surveys, anywhere between 20 and 30%. And we talked as a group about what that means. We also talked, importantly, about the fact that political figures in particular and their acceptance or rejection of violence is actually very powerful in terms of what people think is or is not acceptable. And so that offers us some hope for how we think about it. We also talked about what people can and can't do. Before I get to the slide, I want to say we talked a lot about showing how rhetoric leads to increased threats, and you'll get that in a deck that's distributed, but about how we literally see, people in my job all over this country see that when rhetoric ramps up, particularly when it's dehumanizing, when it's othering, particularly when it accepts violence as an answer, what we see is an incredible spike online in the number of and the volume of threats directed at whatever group of people have been targeted that day. And that incredible increase, we know statistically, does lead to additional violence. And so that'll be in the materials we distribute. And finally, we talked about what we can do about it, right? How do we take on this question? And we had a robust conversation about how to lower the temperature. It focused on, I think, really three things. The first is the fact that so many of the folks standing behind me are friends. So many of them talk about how to solve real people's problems on a day-to-day basis and how we need to make that more public and show that. We talked about social media and how social media has sped the way, sped the dissemination of information, sped the rabbit holes that people can go in, sped the radicalization process and how corrosive that is, and what can folks do as leaders to get people offline, get people outside, get people back connected to their communities. And then talked about setting good examples and specifically how people can set good examples. Talked about sometimes you don't need to say anything, that sometimes after an attack like this, the best thing to do is to condemn the violence and then withhold judgment on motivations for law enforcement to do their work. And then obviously, finally, we talked about Governor Cox's Disagree Better campaign as a model for the rest of the country to follow. I want to invite County Executive Poloncarz to give some remarks.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Governor, for hosting this conversation. We came together, and there are Democrats and Republicans in the room, but we're not here as Democrats and Republicans. We're here as New Yorkers and Americans who are concerned about the tenor and the rhetoric and what has occurred. I knew Melissa Hortman. I had met her. Shared and talked about some of the things that were going on in Minnesota and how they were very similar in New York, even though we had different positions. And when I learned of her assassination, it was a gut punch. But it was also a gut punch to me when there was the assassination attempt on President Trump, knowing the impact that could have on our country, as well as the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And we need to come together, and that's why I'm very thankful that the governor is hosting this discussion, to remind everybody that in a democratic society, we can have differences of opinion. It's important to have differences of opinion. The people in this room and those that are online don't agree on everything when it comes to policy, but we can do it in such a manner where it does not become a blood sport, where people feel like they have to take that next step. Political violence is never acceptable in a democratic republic. If you were upset about the murder of Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, you should be upset about the murder of Charlie Kirk. If you were upset about the murder of Charlie Kirk, you should be upset about the murder of Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark. There's no difference. Murder is murder. Political violence is terrible. I've been subject to death threats. Thankfully, nothing has ever occurred of it, but people were held responsible for their actions and the threats that were made. And we need to remind everybody that the individuals who are serving our community are doing it because they're trying to create a better community for all. We don't always have to agree on the policy, but we can work together, regardless of political affiliations, to create better cities, towns, counties, states, and country. And so I want to thank the governor for hosting this event and bringing us together, and also speaking to our fellow New Yorkers and Americans that when we work together, we accomplish so much more. The divisiveness that we see in our country is something that we will remember for the rest of our lives. And if last week's act is the last act of political violence that we see during our lives, then we will all have accomplished something by reminding everybody we all have a role in our country as citizens, and that is to play an active role in our democracy, not through violence, but through speaking up and letting the elected officials know where they stand on issues and where you stand on issues. Criticism is okay. It's embedded in the First Amendment right of free speech. We always understand as elected officials, we will be criticized sometimes for our actions, but that is where it must stop. It can't go to the next level. So thank you, Governor, for hosting this conversation.
Good afternoon. I'm County Executive Steve Newhouse from Orange County in the Hudson Valley. Governor, I want to thank you for bringing us together. This is the right thing to do. And all my colleagues that are standing behind me, we had a very good dialogue. I will tell you, I didn't know Charlie Kirk. I am a county executive trying to run a county, and more importantly, I'm a father. I got 4 children that, in the last couple of days, are asking me what is going on in this country, and is this country falling apart? And I think we, as elected officials, and the governor's taking the lead here, and some of the stuff that we talked about that the other governors are talking about, to actually take command of the dialogue and say that it's not acceptable to talk in terms of mentioning violence, where now people are taking it seriously. I think going forward, what you're going to see in this country and what you're going to see in these counties across the state and New York State is more security, more intelligence to make sure that we're protecting the public, because everywhere I've gone in the last week, it's on everybody's mind. Are we safe? Is this country going to be okay? The next thing you're going to see is, more importantly, is us making sure that when we hear people speaking, that we stop them and say, this is not acceptable, because for too long they've been getting away with it. There are some good positive things that have happened in the last few days. We're seeing non-typical late night comedians, sports stadiums that normally don't get involved in us, saying this is not America and this is not right. And we need to see more of that, and we need to hold people accountable. So again, Governor, thank you for having us today, and I'm happy to be part of the solution with you.
Thank you.
Governor, I'm curious, you mentioned social media, and I think Commissioner Bray did as well. You've made a really huge effort in social media for children. Do you see any legislative solution here to getting people out of these feedback loops of extremism on social media?
That's an excellent question. It does start with making sure that our children get off on the right foot and are not subjected to bombardment of addictive algorithms designed for profit for large corporations that take their personal data, sell it, or try to, create the addiction, which they're very successful at, that holds our kids close and doesn't allow them to escape, which is why our distraction-free environment, the cell phone ban, is a really tough adjustment for our children. But the praise we're getting from both sides of the aisle is extraordinary. I think there's a lesson for adults in that environment, that your mental health is stronger and your human relationships are deeper when you can escape the clutches of your own cell phone at work all day, or taking a walk with somebody and you're on your cell phone, or you're supposed to be at dinner engaging with your children. So I would say even that cell phone is often the vehicle for the social media content. And I think we all do just need to take a breath and realize there was life before this. It wasn't a perfect life, but I would say the mental health of not just teenagers, which I've studied intensely, but the mental health of adults was far better. So let me take a look at what options there may be, but I think that you've hit on something to, at least through information, talk about healthier New Yorkers overall, and it starts with mental health.
I want to bring up a moment when Democratic lawmakers from Texas were here. You say, and I quote, "This is war, we are at war." Was that a mistake to say?
No, I would say that we're time for a reset when you believe that in the moment it felt very threatening to our democracy. And I feel that I'm a soldier for my democracy. I have to protect my democracy, our democracy. Each one of us have that responsibility. So I felt like our democracy was under attack. But I certainly, with this reset moment, I'm going to be closely thinking about the words that I have and the effect they may have as well.
Governor, you have a possible opponent next year in Elise Stefanik, who has repeatedly referred to Mamdani, the candidate running for mayor, as a communist. A number of Democrats have repeatedly referred to President Trump as saying he's a fascist. So how do you get past that? Because this is constant. It's literally almost on a single, every day you're seeing it, and the people behind you and on the screen are either against or supportive of these candidates. So that's going to continue long after this thing here today. How do you get past that specifically, other than just saying, we need to tone down the rhetoric?
No, you're actually describing the political climate of today. It is the throwing around labels and, ultimately the dehumanization of others that I think could start to spiral into a more dangerous place. And that's what we all have to be on guard of with our own language, particularly. We know what we can control, and that is what we say and do. Whether on social media or in person. So that's why the phrase reset is important to me, that people take a step backwards and realize the effect that they may be having unbeknownst to them. You don't know that something you said isn't being taken as a challenge to someone to do something that they otherwise might. So I won't refer to the specifics there, but I will say this, there should be no othering and dehumanizing language, but that doesn't mean I'm forfeiting my right to tell the truth either.
A lot of people start using social media when they're much younger. So, and obviously it develops as they get older in their young 20s, as you saw with the Charlie Kirk suspects. So, what message do you have for parents for their teenagers to make sure sometimes they don't know what they're doing on social media?
And again, I look back at the case of the, his 18-year-old on his birthday, a Broome County resident who had been radicalized number of years before. And part of it was during the pandemic, his whole existence was confined to probably his basement because there was no interaction with students in a classroom and no normal activities. Our children were, held captive for a number of years, and that created the opportunity, I believe, that maybe it would have been there anyhow, but I think it fostered that. And so that's something that parents, we talk about, get offline and get outside. It's not just a silly slogan. It's real. It means, tell your kids, no cell phones till a later age. And I'm sorry, if you forget your lunch, you won't forget it tomorrow. Or you'll make friends with somebody and borrow half of their peanut butter sandwich. That's the world I came out of. And so I'm just trying to, in our schools at least, that we have made a major decision. And I think people are going to look back at this time and say, this is when we started saving our kids in New York and making them smarter and more adjusted with the cell phone ban. But parents should be looking at what we're doing in schools and looking to do that at home as well. Go outside and play. Leave your phone here if you have to have a phone. Just go out and engage with others. Go to the mall. Go to the ball field. I think parents have an enormous role here, and if they could take something from this experience about also talking about the language that they use when they talk about what's happening in the news, on television, or their own social media posts. Kids watch everything we do. They watch us intensely. And I'm always surprised what my adult kids will say, well, remember when you said that? It's like, well, you were 7 years old. But be aware that you're shaping the next generation of Americans. And we want them to love this country and respect it and respect the foundation, which was built on not agreement always, but they did come to the grand compromise that created this democracy that we're still living under 250 years later. And that's an extraordinary experiment that must endure, but one that we have responsibility in our time to make sure that there are not these assaults and these attacks that wear it down.
Call for other topics?
All right. Thank you, everybody. All right. You have real work to do, team.
Strike. What do you make of the union's request to the president to appoint a special board of mediators, and also the effect of that, which puts off any kind of strike action, at least for now?
We don't want to strike at all. We don't want to strike at all. If you look at, what this union is asking for in comparison to what other unions have agreed to, and these threats to destabilize the local economy because of their greedy asks, is deeply disturbing. Now, it was unfortunately the White House that first authorized the ability for them to threaten this strike and perhaps execute it. That's why I have called upon the White House, as well as the Republican Congress members from Long Island, to step up and do something. But I don't want to just create an environment where they just kick the can down the road. Well, we'll find a better time to strike, but we're going to strike. We have to get away from the strike language. And the White House and others should be using their power to say, you're not allowed to strike. You cannot strike. Work it out at the table. And that's our position right now. I do not want to see this happen.
Governor, you endorsed Zermel Mamdani last night. I'm curious, can you take us into, what sealed the deal? You said you spoke to him several times. I mean, what were you looking to hear that you finally did hear? What sealed the deal?
I had a number of conversations with him over the summer in person to talk about, my priorities. Public safety, you've heard me say that 1,000 times, public safety. I needed to know that there was a seriousness about protecting New Yorkers of all faiths. I know there's particular anxiety from the Jewish community. I needed to hear that there was an affirmation of interest in ensuring that they feel protected as well. But I think what put me over the top was this discussion about Donald Trump inserting himself into our local election, trying to put his thumb on the scale and perhaps clear the field for his designated choice. And that was very disturbing and frightening to me over the last week. When I started hearing that, I said, you know what? I can work on affordability. I can work on public safety, and we'll do that. But I want to make sure that I have someone who's not tainted or compromised, because the president, who should be more concerned about dealing with the bad actors out on the global stage, and let us handle our local elections here in New York and elsewhere. So that's probably what made me even more committed to know that I could work with an individual who will stand up to Donald Trump, shoulder to shoulder with me. So that was the final calculation.
When did you let him know? Did he learn in the op-ed with the rest of us, or did you let him know before? What was the reaction?
I had a meeting a few days earlier, and I said it's important that we fight on behalf of New Yorkers, fight the administration for their attempt to undermine our election. And so, we talked about, if he gets elected, charting a path forward in the next legislative session, where we can be real partners to deliver meaningful change for the people of New York City. So I'm prepared to do that when the election's over as well.
Great, Austin, go ahead.
Governor, last year when you delayed congestion pricing, Zermel Mamdani said that this was the reason why people don't trust politicians. So I guess with that sort of history between you two, are you worried he might undermine you in the future?
No, that was the assessment of a number of people who just didn't know me well enough that when I said it's a pause, it was a pause. I'll grant that people didn't know me as well as they do now, because when I say it's a pause, it is a pause. And I was able to do what I wanted to do because I've been focused on affordability for the last 4 years. I didn't want New Yorkers to have to pay $15. I thought it was too high. I worked hard to drive it down 40%, but I had to wait for months to get permission from the Biden administration because they'd already given the permission at the 15, and we had to show a path forward into future years. That's what you have to do. So, no, I can move on from that. Certainly worse things have been said about me, and I have moved on. Give you a whole list of people.
Governor, what's your response to the president continuing to suggest that he will pull funding if Zoran Mondani does win?
That's what I'm talking about. Okay, I mean, think about what is implied in that threat. That if one person is elected mayor and not a different person, that he's going to threaten to withhold federal dollars despite how much we send as New Yorkers into the federal coffers. He'll withhold it from us. So I'm accurate in what I'm saying here. This is not an idle threat. You know, he's saying that he's watching closely, going to keep an eye on things and possibly threaten us. I would encourage him not to do that. I would encourage him to let the election play out fairly, without interference. Understand that I, as governor, have some influence on what happens across the state, and I will use that influence to make sure that New York is a safe, secure place, and that our policies support our values. And I can get there with Zoran Mondani, which is why I endorsed him. And the president, as I mentioned, must have higher priorities to focus on than that.
You were talking just recently about this, obviously you were saying to turn down the temperature of the room, and that chart earlier said the last 10 years, 2015. You just spent a few moments talking about what Donald Trump has done. That timeline pretty much matches up with Donald Trump's emergence as a candidate so do you think that, how much of this do you attribute specifically to him as opposed to just social media? I mean, a lot of those things on that board are things he's done, spreading conspiracy theories and whatnot. So how much of this do you blame him, or do you blame him?
As I said, I'm not going to dehumanize individuals. I don't do that. But I'm also not going to be suppressed in my ability to tell the truth about what's going on. All of you are smart. You can look at the trajectory of what happened and who was in charge and dissect what was said at political rallies about reporters and other individuals. There was a long history of language that was, I would say, in many respects, new to the political dialogue. Things that perhaps others in the past thought you couldn't get away with. And that's become normalized, and that's part of the problem. So, everyone in our entire country who's in a position of authority and influence, and certainly our elected officials, needs to be aware of the impact that words have. Our commissioner drew a direct correlation between that kind of dialogue and violence. And so I'm not going to stand here and blame anybody. You can all look at the chart and figure it out.
Governor, what reassurances did you get from Mondani when it comes to policing? Any specific red lines that you've drawn at this stage of the game?
I welcomed the invitation to be involved in discussing public safety frequently, and including leadership at the police department, NYPD, and so I will take him up on that offer, and I will continue to talk about the work that we've done, the progress we've made, and how we don't want to go back to the days when crime was escalating. And I think he's a very smart individual, and he will certainly see, as I see and others see, that sometimes administrations are judged on that one crime statistic. And I'm not going to root against the mayor of New York City. I work with Bill de Blasio, I work with Eric Adams, I work with Zoran Mondani if he's elected, because I'm never going to root against New York City. I'm going to make sure that the leader is successful. but I also have a path to be able to shape policies based on the power I have right here in this Capitol.
Great.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Appointment of a police commissioner? Would you like Jessica Tisch to stay on?
I've been invited to participate in the conversations about strong leadership at the NYPD. Thank you, everybody.